When Victoria Hale's corporate yacht capsized in the middle of the Pacific, the last person she expected to keep her alive was the quiet logistics worker she'd barely noticed at the office. But as the storm tore everything away, her power, her control, her carefully built walls, Daniel Cross became the only thing standing between her and the ocean's endless depths. This is their story of survival, vulnerability, and what happens when two people from opposite worlds are forced to rebuild everything from nothing. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The fluorescent lights in the logistics center hummed their usual monotonous note as Daniel Cross checked the shipment manifest for the third time that morning. His desk sat in the corner of the warehouse floor, wedged between two filing cabinets that hadn't been updated since before he was hired. The smell of cardboard and diesel fuel had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. "Cross, you got a minute?" Daniel looked up to find Marcus Chen, the logistics supervisor, standing by his desk with an expression that didn't quite match the casual tone of his voice. Marcus never just stopped by to chat. "Sure. What's up?" Marcus glanced around the warehouse floor, then lowered his voice. "You're being pulled from rotation tomorrow. Corporate request." Daniel set down his pen. "Corporate for what?" "No idea. But it came from high up, like really high up." Marcus leaned against the filing cabinet. "They want you on some yacht thing, executive retreat or something." The words didn't immediately make sense. Daniel had worked at Hale Industries for 4 years, mostly keeping his head down and his interactions minimal. He processed shipping routes, managed inventory databases, and went home to his son. He didn't attend corporate events. He certainly didn't get invited on yachts. "There's got to be a mistake," Daniel said. "That's what I thought too, but I checked 3 times. Your employee ID is on the list." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Daniel the email. Sure enough, there was his name, sandwiched between a bunch of executive titles he didn't recognize. "Leaves tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. from the harbor." Daniel stared at the screen. "Why would they want me there?" "Maybe they need someone to manage logistics?" Marcus shrugged. "Or maybe somebody up there actually noticed you exist. Either way, it's not optional. HR already approved your time off." After Marcus left, Daniel sat at his desk for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Carol, who watched his son after school most days. "Jamie asked if you're still picking him up today. Everything okay?" Daniel typed back quickly. "Yeah, all good. Be there by 4. He looked at the email Marcus had shown him one more time, then got back to work. Whatever this yacht thing was, he'd deal with it tomorrow. Right now, he had 12 manifests to clear before end of shift, and Jamie had a science project due on Friday that they still hadn't finished. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. Daniel left at 3:45, drove across town to Carol's small house near the elementary school, and found his son sprawling on the living room floor with colored markers scattered around him. "Dad!" Jamie looked up, his gap-toothed grin immediate and bright. "Look what I made." Daniel crouched down to examine the drawing, a lopsided spaceship surrounded by stars that were definitely just asterisks. "That's pretty cool, buddy. Is this for the science project?" "Sort of. Mrs. Patterson said we could draw what we want to be when we grow up. I want to be an astronaut." "An astronaut, huh?" Daniel ruffled his son's hair. "That's a good choice." Carol appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was in her mid-60s with reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose and a seemingly endless supply of patience for Jamie's energy. "He's been talking about space all afternoon," she said. "I tried to get him to start his homework, but he insisted the drawing was more important." "Homework can wait," Daniel said, though he made a mental note to check it later. "Come on, Jamie, let's get you home." They walked the 3 blocks back to their apartment, Jamie chattering the entire way about rocket fuel and zero gravity. Daniel listened, half his mind still turning over the yacht situation. He hadn't told Jamie about it yet, didn't know how to explain something he didn't understand himself. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table for 2. But it was theirs. Daniel had worked hard to keep it that way after Jamie's mother left. After she decided motherhood wasn't what she wanted and disappeared into a life Daniel had stopped trying to imagine. That night, after Jamie finished his actual homework and brushed his teeth, Daniel sat on the edge of his son's bed. "Hey, bud, I need to tell you something. Jamie looked up from the book he was pretending to read. Are we in trouble? No, nothing like that. Daniel smiled despite himself. I have to go on a work trip tomorrow. Just for a few days. Jamie's face fell. But you never go on trips. I know, it's kind of a special thing, corporate stuff. Will you be back for my science fair? Of course. It's not until next week, right? I'll be back way before then. Daniel hoped that was true. Carol's going to look after you while I'm gone. Jamie considered this, then nodded slowly. Okay, but you have to bring me back something cool. Deal. After Jamie fell asleep, Daniel stayed up later than he should have, packing a small duffel bag with clothes he hoped were appropriate for whatever a corporate yacht retreat entailed. He didn't own a suit. The nicest thing he had was a button-down shirt he wore to parent-teacher conferences. His phone buzzed again, this time an automated message from HR with detailed instructions. Arrive at Harbor Point Marina by 5:45 a.m., bring valid ID, business casual attire recommended. The message ended with a note that seemed almost like an afterthought. This invitation is extended personally by CEO Victoria Hale. Attendance is strongly encouraged. Daniel set his phone down and rubbed his eyes. Victoria Hale. He'd seen her exactly twice in 4 years, once during a company-wide meeting where she'd spoken from a stage so far away she might as well have been on television, and once in passing when she'd walked through the warehouse with a group of executives. She hadn't looked at him. Hadn't looked at anyone, really. Just moved through the space like she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Why would someone like that personally invite someone like him onto a yacht? The question followed him into an uneasy sleep. Harbor Point. Marina at dawn was quieter than Daniel expected. A few gulls circled overhead, their cries sharp in the still morning air. The water stretched out in dark, glassy sheets, reflecting the pale orange of the rising sun. Daniel arrived at 5:40, duffel bag in hand, and immediately felt out of place. The other people gathering near the dock were wearing tailored blazers and expensive watches. They spoke in low, confident tones, checking their phones with the ease of people who expected the world to wait for them. He recognized a few faces from company directories, department heads, senior executives, people whose names appeared in all staff emails. None of them recognized him. Name. Daniel turned to find a young woman with a clipboard standing beside him. She wore a polo shirt with the Hale Industries logo embroidered on the chest. Daniel Cross. She scanned her list, then checked a box. You're all set. Boarding starts in 5 minutes. You'll be in Group B. Group B? The yacht has 2 levels. Group A is executive seating on the upper deck. Group B is general seating below. She said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural division in the world. Daniel nodded and stepped aside, watching as more people arrived. Expensive luggage, designer sunglasses, conversations about quarterly projections and market positioning. He checked his phone. Still no messages from Carol. Jamie was probably still asleep. At exactly 5:45, a man in a captain's uniform appeared at the dock and gestured toward the yacht. It was bigger than Daniel had imagined, sleek and white with tinted windows and polished railings that caught the early light. Welcome aboard the Meridian, the captain said. We'll be departing shortly. Please proceed to your designated seating areas. The crowd began to move. Daniel followed Group B down a set of stairs into a lower cabin that was all leather seating and soft lighting. It was nicer than any place he'd ever been, but there was something sterile about it, like a luxury waiting room. He found a seat near the window and set his duffel bag on the floor. Across from him, 2 executives were already deep in conversation about a merger that apparently everyone but Daniel knew about. The engines hummed to life. The yacht began to pull away from the dock. Daniel looked out the window, watching the marina shrink into the distance. He thought about Jamie, probably waking up right about now, wondering where his dad had gone. I'll be back before you know it, buddy. The yacht cut smoothly through the water, heading out toward open ocean. An hour into the trip, Daniel still hadn't seen Victoria Hale. The lower cabin had filled with quiet conversation and the occasional clink of glasses as attendants moved through offering coffee and pastries. Daniel had accepted both, though the coffee tasted too bitter and the pastry too sweet. He wasn't used to this. He pulled out his phone, intending to send Carol a quick message, but there was no signal. They were already too far from shore. First time on the Meridian? Daniel looked up. The man sitting next to him was younger than most of the executives, maybe late 20s, with the kind of haircut that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly grocery budget. Yeah, Daniel said. First time on any yacht, actually. The man smiled. It's something, right? Hale doesn't do anything halfway. I'm Eric, by the way, marketing. Daniel, logistics. Eric's eyebrows lifted slightly. Logistics? Huh. Didn't know we were bringing warehouse guys on these trips. There was no malice in his tone, just curiosity, but Daniel felt the otherness of it anyway. He was the outlier here, the mistake on the list. Yeah, me neither, Daniel said. Before Eric could respond, the intercom crackled to life. Good morning, everyone. This is Captain Reeves. We're currently 70 miles offshore and making excellent time. We'll be arriving at the retreat location in approximately 4 hours. In the meantime, Ms. Hale has requested that all senior staff join her on the upper deck for a briefing. Thank you. Eric stood immediately, straightening his jacket. That's my cue. Enjoy the ride. Daniel watched him go, then settled back into his seat. 4 more hours. He could handle that. Except the sky was changing. It had been clear when they left the marina, but now, looking out the window, Daniel could see clouds gathering on the horizon. Dark ones. The kind that didn't look like they were just passing through. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Across the cabin, a woman in a gray suit frowned at her phone, then glanced toward the windows with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. The yacht rocked slightly. Not much, just enough to remind everyone they were on water. Daniel's stomach tightened. Set. The storm hit faster than anyone expected. One moment, the ocean was choppy but manageable. The next, the yacht was tilting hard to the left, and someone's coffee cup went skittering across the floor. The lights flickered. Everyone remained seated, came the captain's voice over the intercom, but the calm authority from earlier was gone. Now it was clipped. Urgent. We're experiencing rough weather. Please stay. The intercom cut out. The yacht lurched again, harder this time. Daniel grabbed the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white. Around him, people were starting to stand, voices rising in confusion and alarm. What's happening? Is this normal? Someone get the captain. Another lurch. The lights went out completely. For a moment, there was only darkness and the sound of the ocean slamming against the hull. Then emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a dim red glow. Daniel's heart was pounding. He forced himself to breathe, to think. He'd been through bad situations before. Different kinds, but bad enough. Panic didn't help. Action did. He stood, steadying himself against the seat as the yacht rocked violently. Everyone needs to stay calm, he said, loud enough to cut through the noise. A few people turned to look at him. Sit down and hold on to something. Don't try to move around. Who the hell are you? Someone snapped. Someone trying not to drown, Daniel shot back. Sit. Down. The yacht tilted again, and this time it didn't right itself. It kept going, the angle growing steeper. Somewhere above them, something crashed, glass shattering, shouts. Then the water came. It wasn't a wave. It was a wall. It slammed through the windows on the port side, exploding inward with a force that sent people sprawling. Daniel went down hard, his shoulders slamming into the floor as icy seawater flooded the cabin. He couldn't hear anything over the roar of the ocean, couldn't see anything but churning white foam and thrashing bodies. His lungs screamed for air. He kicked toward what he hoped was up, broke the surface, gasped. The yacht was sinking. People were screaming, clawing at each other, trying to reach the stairs. Daniel grabbed the nearest solid object, a table bolted to the floor, and pulled himself toward the stairwell. His legs felt like lead. The water was so cold it burned. Someone grabbed his arm. A woman, her face pale with terror, eyes wide. Help me, she choked out. Please. Daniel pulled her with him, both of them fighting against the current as the yacht groaned and tilted further. They made it to the stairs. Up, one step, two. The water was rising faster than they could climb. He shoved the woman ahead of him. Go! Don't stop! She scrambled upward. Daniel followed, his lungs burning, his vision starting to blur at the edges. They burst onto the upper deck into chaos. The storm was a living thing, wind howling, rain lashing sideways, waves towering over the yacht like mountains. People were scrambling for life vests, for lifeboats, for anything. The crew was shouting instructions that no one could hear, and there, in the middle of it all, was Victoria Hale. She wasn't screaming. wasn't panicking. She stood near the railing, soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face, barking orders at a crew member who looked 2 seconds from passing out. "Get that lifeboat deployed now," she shouted. "I don't care if the mechanism is jammed. Figure it out." The yacht lurched again. Victoria stumbled, caught herself on the railing. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He crossed the deck in 3 strides, grabbed her arm just as another wave crashed over the side. The impact sent them both sprawling, but Daniel kept his grip, pulling her back from the edge. She stared at him, recognition flickering in her eyes. "We need to get off this thing," Daniel said. "Now!" A massive crack split the air. The main mast snapped, crashing down onto the deck in a shower of sparks and splintered wood. People scattered. Someone didn't move fast enough. Victoria's face went white. "We have to—" "There's nothing we can do," Daniel said, hating the truth of it. "Come on!" He pulled her toward the nearest lifeboat. It was already half deployed, swinging wildly in the wind. A crew member was struggling with the release mechanism, his hands shaking. "Let me," Daniel said. He'd worked with mechanical systems his whole life, different contexts, same principles. He found the manual override, yanked it hard. The boat dropped into the water with a jarring splash. "Get in!" the crew member shouted. Victoria climbed over the railing first, dropping into the lifeboat. Daniel followed, his feet barely finding purchase before another wave slammed into the yacht. The lifeboat jerked away from the hull, the rope tether straining. "Cut it!" someone yelled. The crew member slashed the rope with a knife. The lifeboat spun away from the sinking yacht, caught in the current. Daniel grabbed the oars, fighting to keep them from capsizing. The storm battered them from every direction. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him. Water filled the bottom of the boat faster than he could process. Victoria was bailing with her hands, her movements frantic but focused. "How many others made it off?" she shouted over the wind. Daniel didn't know. He couldn't think about it. All he could do was row, pulling against the waves with everything he had. The yacht disappeared into the storm behind them. They were alone. So, Daniel didn't know how long he rowed. Time became meaningless in the storm. There was only the next wave, the next pull of the oars, the next breath. His arms screamed. His hands were raw and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Eventually, minutes or hours later, the storm began to ease. The waves grew smaller. The rain softened to a drizzle. The wind died to a whisper. And then there was just silence. Daniel collapsed forward, gasping, the oars slipping from his hands. His whole body shook. "Are you okay?" Victoria's voice. Hoarse, but steady. Daniel lifted his head. She was sitting across from him, drenched and pale, but alive. Her eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion written across her face. "Yeah," he managed. "You?" "I've been better." They sat in silence for a moment, the lifeboat rocking gently on the now calm water. The ocean stretched out in every direction, empty and endless. "How many others got off?" Victoria asked again. Daniel looked back toward where the yacht had been. There was nothing, no debris, no other lifeboats, just water. "I don't know," he said quietly. Victoria's jaw tightened. She looked away, staring out at the horizon. Daniel scanned the boat. Emergency supplies were stowed in a compartment under the seat. Flares, a first aid kit, water rations, a tarp. Not much, but something. "We should take inventory," he said. "Figure out what we've got." Victoria didn't respond for a moment. Then she nodded. "You're right." They worked together, pulling out supplies and laying them in the bottom of the boat. 2 gallons of water, a dozen protein bars, a handheld radio that crackled with static when Daniel tried it, a single emergency beacon. Daniel activated the beacon and set it in the center of the boat. Its red light blinked steadily. "Someone will find us," Victoria said. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "Yeah," Daniel said. But he didn't know if he believed it. The sun broke through the clouds, harsh and bright. Daniel shielded his eyes, scanning the horizon again. Still, nothing. "What's your name?" Victoria asked suddenly. He looked at her. "Daniel. Daniel Cross." "Why were you on the yacht, Daniel?" "I was going to ask you the same thing." "You're the one who invited me." Her brow furrowed. "I didn't invite anyone personally. My assistant handles the guest lists. The HR email said it was a personal invitation from you." Victoria's expression shifted. Something like realization or maybe anger. Of course it did, she muttered. Margaret loves making me look hands-on. So you don't know why I was there? No. She studied him. What do you do at Hale Industries? Logistics. I manage shipping routes and inventory. Logistics, she repeated, like she was tasting the word. And you just happened to be the one who got us off that yacht. I did what anyone would have done. No, Victoria said, her voice flat. You didn't. Most people froze. You moved. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. He looked down at his hands. The blood had dried, leaving dark streaks across his palms. We need to conserve water, he said, changing the subject. Ration what we have until rescue comes. Victoria nodded. Agreed. They fell into silence again. The lifeboat drifted, carried by currents Daniel didn't understand. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, baking down on them. Daniel used the tarp to create a makeshift shelter, draping it over the oars to give them some shade. It wasn't much, but it helped. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they still hadn't seen a single sign of rescue. Daniel checked the beacon, still blinking. Victoria sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring out at the water. She hadn't said much since the morning, hadn't complained, hadn't broken down. But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her arms a little too tight. You should try to sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. I'm fine. You're exhausted. So are you. I'm used to it, Daniel said. It was true. Late nights with Jamie, early mornings at work, the constant hum of keeping everything together. Exhaustion was just part of the landscape. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, then finally she nodded. Wake me if anything changes. She curled up on the bench, using a life vest as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Daniel stayed awake, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The ocean was so quiet now, almost peaceful. He thought about Jamie, about Carol, who would be wondering where he was, about the science fair project they hadn't finished. I'll get back to you, buddy, I promise. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out. Daniel turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness. And there, barely visible against the horizon, was a shadow that didn't belong to the water. Land. Daniel didn't wake Victoria immediately. He watched the shadow on the horizon for another 10 minutes, making sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. But the longer he stared, the more certain he became. That dark mass against the sky wasn't moving. It wasn't a cloud or another boat. It was solid. Victoria, he said quietly, reaching over to touch her shoulder. Wake up. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a second, she looked disoriented, like she'd forgotten where she was. Then reality settled back in, and her expression hardened. What is it? Land, I think. Daniel pointed toward the horizon. Over there. Victoria sat up, squinting into the darkness. The moon had risen, casting just enough light to make out shapes. She was silent for a long moment. Are you sure? Pretty sure. She grabbed the oars before he could. Then we need to move, now. Daniel didn't argue. He took the other oar and together they began rowing toward the shadow. His arms protested immediately, still raw from the storm, but he pushed through it. Victoria matched his pace, her strokes surprisingly strong for someone who probably spent most of her time behind a desk. They didn't talk. There was nothing to say. Either they'd reach land or they wouldn't. The shadow grew larger as they rowed, slowly at first, then faster. Daniel's heart pounded, not from exertion, but from something closer to hope. After an hour of rowing, he could make out details. Trees, a shoreline, the white foam of waves breaking against rocks. Careful, Victoria said, her voice tight. We don't know what's under the water. Daniel angled the boat, trying to find a safe approach. The moonlight helped, but not much. He could see dark shapes beneath the surface. Rocks, maybe coral. One wrong move and they'd tear the bottom out of the boat. There, Victoria pointed to a break in the rocks, a small stretch of what looked like sand. Aim for that. They adjusted course. The current fought them, trying to pull the boat sideways, but they kept rowing. Daniel's entire body burned. His hands were bleeding again, leaving slick marks on the oar. The boat scraped against something. Victoria winced at the sound, but they kept going. Another scrape, this one harder. Then the bow hit sand with a soft crunch. They'd made it. Daniel jumped out first, the water coming up to his knees. The sand shifted under his feet, but it was solid. Real. He grabbed the front of the boat and pulled, dragging it further onto the shore. Victoria climbed out and helped, both of them hauling until the boat was clear of the tide. Then they just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the beach that stretched out before them. "We made it," Victoria said. Her voice was strange, flat, like she couldn't quite believe it. Daniel looked around. The beach was narrow, bordered by dense jungle vegetation that disappeared into darkness. The air smelled different here, salt and earth and something green and alive. He could hear insects chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "We should stay near the boat tonight," he said. "Wait for daylight before we explore." Victoria nodded. She looked exhausted, her clothes still damp from the ocean, her hair tangled and wild. But she didn't sit down. She just kept looking at the jungle, her expression unreadable. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked. "That we have no idea where we are," she said. "No idea if anyone's looking for us. No idea if we're on an inhabited island or something in the middle of nowhere." "One problem at a time," Daniel said. "Right now we're alive. That's what matters." Victoria turned to look at him. "You're very calm about this." "Panicking won't help. Neither will pretending everything's fine." "I'm not pretending." Daniel sat down on the sand, his legs finally giving out. "But I've got a kid who needs me to come home, so I'm going to focus on making that happen." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then she sat down beside him, keeping a careful distance. "How old?" 7. "What's his name?" "Jamie." She didn't ask about Jamie's mother. Daniel was grateful for that. They sat in silence, listening to the ocean behind them and the jungle ahead. The emergency beacon blinked steadily in the boat, its red light a small defiance against the darkness. "Do you think anyone survived?" Victoria asked suddenly. "From the yacht." Daniel had been trying not to think about that, about the people who'd been in the cabin with him, the crew member who'd helped them deploy the lifeboat, all those faces he'd seen for just a few hours before everything went wrong. "I don't know," he said honestly. Victoria pulled her knees to her chest again, wrapping her arms around them. She looked smaller like this, less like the CEO he'd seen from a distance, and more like someone who was just as scared as he was. "I should have canceled the trip," she said. "The weather reports were unclear, I knew that. But I didn't want to look weak. Didn't want to—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now. You couldn't have known the storm would hit like that. I could have been more careful." Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Maybe she was right. Maybe someone should have canceled the trip. But hindsight was easy when you were sitting on a beach instead of drowning in a cabin. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll take first watch." "Watch for what?" "I don't know, but I'm not sleeping until I know we're safe." Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just nodded and stretched out on the sand, using her arm as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out again. Daniel stayed awake, watching the jungle and the ocean in turns. The beacon kept blinking. The stars kept turning overhead, and somewhere, far away, Jamie was probably wondering why his dad hadn't called. When the first light of dawn began to creep across the sky, Daniel finally allowed himself to close his eyes, just for a moment, just to rest. He woke to Victoria shaking his shoulder. "Daniel, look!" He sat up, groggy and disoriented. The sun was fully up now, bright and hot. Victoria was pointing toward the jungle. "There's smoke," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. Sure enough, a thin column of smoke was rising above the trees, maybe half a mile inland. "Someone else is here," Victoria said. Her voice carried something Daniel couldn't quite place. Relief, maybe? Or fear? "Or it's just a fire," Daniel said. "Natural causes." "In the jungle? After a storm?" She had a point. Daniel stood brushing sand off his clothes. His whole body ached. "We should check it out." "What if it's dangerous? What if it's rescue?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. They pulled the boat further up the beach, hiding it behind a cluster of rocks. Daniel grabbed the emergency kit, slinging it over his shoulder. The beacon stayed with the boat. If anyone came looking from the air or sea, they'd need it. They started walking along the beach, looking for a path into the jungle. It didn't take long to find one, a narrow gap between trees that looked almost deliberate, like something had been moving through it regularly. "Stay close," Daniel said. They pushed into the jungle. Immediately, the air changed. It was thicker here, humid and heavy. Vines hung from branches overhead, and roots snaked across the ground, threatening to trip them with every step. The sound of insects was louder, a constant buzzing that made it hard to think. Daniel kept his eyes on the smoke. It was harder to see through the canopy, but he could still catch glimpses of it rising above the trees. "How far do you think it is?" Victoria asked. She was breathing harder now, struggling to keep up. "Maybe another quarter mile." "You okay?" "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Daniel could see that. Her face was flushed and she was favoring her left leg, but he didn't push it. If she wanted to keep going, they'd keep going. The jungle opened up suddenly into a small clearing, and there, in the center, was the source of the smoke. It wasn't a campfire, it was a plane, or what was left of one. The wreckage was scattered across the clearing, twisted metal and charred debris. The tail section was still mostly intact, but the rest had been torn apart. Smoke rose from the engine, thin and acrid. "Jesus," Victoria breathed. Daniel approached carefully, scanning the wreckage for any sign of movement. The cockpit was crushed. He didn't look too closely at what was inside. "There's no one here," Victoria said. "It's old. Look at the rust." She was right. This wasn't a fresh crash. The metal was corroded, the vegetation already starting to reclaim parts of the fuselage. This plane had been here for months, maybe years. "So we're not the first people to end up on this island," Daniel said. "Apparently not." They searched the wreckage, looking for anything useful. Most of it was too damaged or too rusted to salvage. But in the tail section, Daniel found a storage compartment that had stayed relatively dry. Inside were a few items: a waterproof tarp, a machete with a rusted blade, and a metal canteen. "Better than nothing," he said, pulling the items out. Victoria was staring at the cockpit again. "Do you think they tried to call for help?" "Probably. Doesn't mean anyone heard them." "That's comforting." Daniel slung the tarp over his shoulder. "Come on, we need to find fresh water. That's priority one." They left the clearing, pushing deeper into the jungle. The terrain grew rougher, sloping upward. Daniel's legs burned with the effort, but he kept moving. Victoria stayed close behind him, her breathing labored but steady. After another hour of walking, they heard it, the sound of running water. Daniel picked up the pace, following the noise until they broke through the trees and found a small stream cutting through the rocks. The water was clear, moving fast over smooth stones. "Is it safe to drink?" Victoria asked. "We'll boil it first." "But yeah, this is good." They filled the canteen and drank sparingly, the water cold and clean. Daniel's whole body seemed to wake up at the taste of it. He hadn't realized how thirsty he'd been. "We should set up camp near here," he said, "close to the water source." Victoria looked around. "Here? In the jungle?" "Unless you want to haul water back and forth to the beach every day." She didn't argue. They spent the next few hours clearing a small area near the stream, using the machete to cut away the worst of the undergrowth. It was brutal work. The blade was dull, and every swing sent jolts of pain up Daniel's arms. But slowly, they carved out a space large enough for the two of them. By the time the sun started to dip toward the horizon, they had something resembling a camp. The tarp was strung up between trees, creating a rough shelter. The stream provided water, and Daniel had managed to gather enough dry wood for a small fire. He used the flint from the emergency kit to get it started. It took longer than he wanted. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, but eventually a small flame caught. He fed it carefully until it grew into something steady. Victoria sat on a flat rock near the fire, watching him work. She hadn't said much in the last hour, just helped where she could and stayed out of the way when she couldn't. "You're good at this," she said finally. "At what?" "Surviving." Daniel shrugged. "I've had practice." "In the jungle?" "In life." She didn't press him for details. Instead, she pulled out one of the protein bars from the emergency kit and split it in half, handing one piece to Daniel. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. The jungle around them was alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, something larger moving through the underbrush in the distance. "How long do you think we'll be here?" Victoria asked. "As long as it takes for someone to find us, or until we figure out how to get off this island ourselves." "And if no one's looking for us?" Daniel met her eyes. Then we make it work. Victoria looked away, staring into the fire. I've never been good at making things work. Could have fooled me. You run $1 billion company. That's different. That's control, systems, processes. This is, she gestured at the jungle around them. This is chaos. Chaos is just another kind of system, Daniel said. You just have to figure out the rules. And you think you figured them out? Not even close. But I'm learning. Victoria smiled, just a little. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her since the yacht. It didn't last long, but it was something. They sat by the fire as night fell, neither of them wanting to be the first to give up and sleep. But eventually, exhaustion won. Victoria curled up under the tarp and Daniel banked the fire, making sure it would last through the night. He stayed awake a little longer, listening to the jungle. Somewhere in the distance, an animal howled. Daniel added another log to the fire and settled back against a tree. Tomorrow, they'd start figuring out the rest. Food, shelter. A real plan for getting off this island. But tonight, they were alive. They had water. They had fire. It was enough. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm Daniel hadn't expected but somehow fell into naturally. Wake at dawn, boil water, check the fire, eat whatever meager rations they had left. Then work. The work was endless. There was always something that needed fixing, building, or gathering. Daniel took the lead most of the time, not because Victoria couldn't help, but because she didn't know where to start. And to her credit, she didn't pretend otherwise. "Show me what to do," she'd say. And he would. They reinforced the shelter first, weaving palm fronds into the gaps between the tarp and the branches. It wasn't pretty, but it kept most of the rain out when the afternoon storms rolled through. Victoria's hands blistered from the work, but she didn't complain. She just kept going. Food was harder. The protein bars ran out on the third day. After that, they were on their own. Daniel had never hunted before, but he'd watched enough survival shows to know the basics. He fashioned a spear from a straight branch and the machete, carving the tip into a rough point. It took him 6 tries to catch his first fish, a small, silver thing that fought harder than it had any right to. But when he finally hauled it onto the rocks, Victoria actually laughed. "You did it," she said, like she hadn't believed he could. "Don't get too excited. I have no idea how to clean this thing." They figured it out together. It was messy and awkward, and they probably wasted half the meat. But they cooked what was left over the fire, and it tasted better than anything Daniel had eaten in months. "Not bad," Victoria said, licking her fingers. "Not good either. But not bad." That became their standard. Not bad. Good enough. Better than nothing. On the 5th day, Victoria found a grove of fruit trees near the stream. The fruit was small and tart, nothing like the oranges or apples Daniel was used to, but it was edible. They ate until their stomachs hurt, then gathered as much as they could carry back to camp. "We should map this out," Victoria said. "Mark where the fruit is, where the fish are easiest to catch. Make it more efficient." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You want to optimize survival?" Old habits. But she was right. Over the next few days, they explored more of the island, marking landmarks with piles of stones. The island was bigger than Daniel had initially thought, maybe 3 or 4 miles across. Most of it was jungle, thick and nearly impassable. But there were clearings, streams, and rocky outcroppings that gave them vantage points to see the ocean. They never saw another boat, never saw a plane. The beacon back at the beach kept blinking, but no one came. "Maybe the signal isn't strong enough," Victoria said one afternoon as they stood on a high ridge overlooking the water. "Or maybe no one's looking in this area. Or maybe they think we're dead." Daniel didn't respond. He'd thought the same thing. If the yacht sank fast enough, if there were no other survivors, rescue teams might have assumed everyone went down with it. They could search for weeks and never come close to this island. "We can't just wait," Victoria said. "We need a backup plan." "Like what?" "Build something. A raft. A signal fire big enough to see from miles away. Something." Daniel looked out at the ocean. It stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and indifferent. Building a raft felt impossible, but so did everything else they'd done in the past week. "Okay," he said. "We'll build something." They started gathering materials the next day. Long, straight branches for a frame, vines to lash them together, palm fronds to create a makeshift sail. It was slow, painstaking work. The branches were heavy, and dragging them through the jungle left Daniel's shoulders screaming, but they kept at it. Victoria worked beside him, never complaining, never stopping. She was different now than she'd been on the yacht. Quieter, more focused. Less like the CEO who barked orders and more like someone trying to figure out how to be useful. "You're stronger than you look," Daniel said one afternoon as she hauled a particularly heavy log into camp. "I do yoga," she said dryly. "That's not yoga. That's actual physical labor." "Well, I'm discovering I'm capable of more than I thought." They worked through the afternoon, and by the time the sun set, they had the beginnings of a raft frame. It wasn't much, just a few logs lashed together, but it was progress. That night, they sat by the fire again, eating the last of the fruit and a fish Daniel had caught earlier. The jungle was quieter than usual. Even the insects seemed subdued. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." "Why do you keep going, even when it seems hopeless?" Daniel thought about it. "Because giving up isn't an option. Not when I've got someone depending on me." "Your son?" "Yeah." Victoria stared into the fire. "I don't have that. Someone depending on me, I mean. There are people who work for me, people whose jobs rely on decisions I make. But that's not the same thing, is it?" "No," Daniel said. "It's not." "Must be nice, having that kind of purpose." "It's terrifying mostly, knowing that if you fail, someone else suffers for it. But you don't fail." "I try not to." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've spent my entire life building something. Hale Industries was my father's company, but I made it what it is now. Tripled the revenue, expanded into 6 new markets. And for what? So I can die on some island in the middle of nowhere and no one will even notice I'm gone?" "Someone will notice." "Will they?" "My assistant, maybe. The board, definitely. But only because they'll need to elect a replacement. But who else? I don't have a family. Don't have friends, really. Just colleagues and competitors." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I built an empire, and I'm completely alone in it." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He understood loneliness. He'd felt it plenty after Jamie's mother left. But his loneliness had always been tempered by his son's presence. Victoria's seemed absolute. "You're not alone now," he said finally. She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "No, I guess I'm not." The moment stretched between them, fragile and uncertain. Then Victoria stood, brushing sand off her pants. "I should sleep. We've got more work tomorrow." "Yeah." She disappeared under the tarp. Daniel stayed by the fire, feeding it slowly, keeping the flames alive. He thought about Jamie, about Carol, who was probably taking care of him, about whether his son thought he was ever coming home. He had to believe the answer was yes, had to believe that all of this, the island, the struggle, the endless work, was leading somewhere. Because the alternative was unbearable. The raft took another 4 days to finish. By the time they lashed the final vine into place, both Daniel and Victoria were covered in cuts and bruises. The raft wasn't pretty, it wasn't even particularly sturdy, but it floated, and that was something. "We should test it," Victoria said, eyeing the structure skeptically. "Agreed, but not in open water. Let's try the lagoon first." They dragged the raft to a sheltered inlet they'd found on the western side of the island. The water here was calm, protected by a natural rock barrier. If the raft fell apart, at least they wouldn't get swept out to sea. Daniel pushed it into the water. It bobbed uncertainly, the logs shifting under the weight. He climbed on carefully, distributing his weight as evenly as possible. The raft dipped, but held. "So far, so good," he said. Victoria climbed on next. The raft sank lower, water pooling around their feet. But it didn't capsize. They paddled out into the lagoon using makeshift oars, flat pieces of driftwood they'd scavenged from the beach. The raft moved sluggishly, but it moved. "It's not fast," Victoria said. "It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to get us off this island. And if we hit rough water, if a storm comes, then we're screwed. But we're screwed here too if no one finds us." Victoria didn't argue. They paddled back to shore and pulled the raft onto the sand. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. "When do we leave?" Victoria asked. Daniel looked out at the ocean. The water was calm today, the sky clear, but he knew how fast that could change. "We wait for the right conditions. A few days of clear weather, then we go. And if the right conditions don't come?" They will. But 3 days later, they still hadn't. The weather held, but barely. Clouds gathered on the horizon each afternoon, threatening storms that never quite materialized. Daniel checked the raft daily, making small repairs and adjustments. Victoria gathered extra supplies, fruit, smoked fish, a second canteen they'd fashioned from a hollowed-out gourd. On the 7th day, something changed. Daniel was down by the stream, refilling their water supply, when he heard Victoria shout. He dropped the canteen and ran back to camp. She was standing near the fire pit, staring down at something on the ground. "What is it?" he asked. She pointed. "Footprints." Daniel crouched down. Sure enough, there were prints in the soft dirt near the edge of their camp, fresh ones, not theirs. "Human?" Victoria asked, her voice tight. Daniel studied the prints. They were small, barefoot. Definitely human. And they led away from the camp, disappearing into the jungle. "Someone else is on this island," he said. "Should we follow them?" Daniel stood, scanning the tree line. Whoever had left these prints had been close, maybe watching them. The thought sent a chill down his spine. "Not yet," he said. "Let's see if they come back." They spent the rest of the day on edge, both of them jumping at every sound. But no one appeared. The jungle remained quiet, indifferent to their anxiety. That night, Daniel kept the fire burning brighter than usual. He didn't sleep. Neither did Victoria. "What if they're dangerous?" she asked quietly. "What if they're not? What if they know how to get off this island? Or what if they're the reason that plane crashed? What if they've been here for years and they've lost their minds?" "You're catastrophizing." "I'm being realistic." Daniel didn't argue. She might be right, but they wouldn't know until they had more information. The footprints appeared again the next morning. This time they were closer to the shelter. And there was something else. A small bundle of fruit left near the fire pit, fruit they hadn't gathered themselves. "Someone's leaving us offerings," Victoria said. "Or checking to see if we're dangerous." Same difference. Daniel picked up the fruit. It was fresh, still slightly warm from the sun. Whoever had left it hadn't been gone long. "Hello?" he called out toward the jungle. "We're not going to hurt you. We just want to talk." Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "This is insane," Victoria muttered. "Maybe, but they're trying to communicate. That's something." They left their own offering that night, a piece of smoked fish wrapped in a palm frond. By morning, it was gone, and in its place was something new, a crudely carved figure, small, no bigger than Daniel's palm. It looked like a person, arms outstretched. Victoria picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know, but it's not threatening. It's almost friendly. Or it's a warning. You really see the worst in everything, don't you?" "It's kept me alive this long." Daniel didn't respond. He pocketed the carving and went about his morning routine, but he kept one eye on the jungle, waiting for whoever, or whatever, was out there to show themselves. It took 3 more days. Daniel was working on the raft, reinforcing one of the corner joints, when he heard movement behind him. He turned slowly, expecting Victoria. But it wasn't her. It was a child, a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with dark skin and tangled hair. She wore clothes that were little more than rags, patched together from what looked like sail canvas and woven plant fibers. She stood at the edge of the clearing, watching him with wide, wary eyes. Daniel froze. "Hi," he said softly. The girl didn't respond, she just stared. "I'm Daniel. I'm not going to hurt you." Still nothing, but she didn't run. "Victoria!" Daniel called, not taking his eyes off the girl. "Come here, slowly." Victoria emerged from the jungle carrying an armload of firewood. She stopped short when she saw the girl. "Who?" "I don't know, but I think she's been leaving us the gifts." Victoria set down the firewood carefully, moving like she was approaching a wild animal. "Hi there," she said, her voice gentler than Daniel had ever heard it. "What's your name?" The girl finally spoke. Her voice was small, hesitant. "Mira." "Mira," Victoria repeated. "That's a pretty name. Are you alone here?" Mira shook her head. "No, there are others." "How many others?" "3. We live in the caves, on the other side of the island." Daniel and Victoria exchanged a glance. "How long have you been here?" Daniel asked. Mira thought about it. "I don't know. A long time. Since the plane." The plane we found, the crashed one. Mira nodded. My parents were pilots. They died when it crashed, but some of us survived. Victoria's expression softened. I'm sorry, Mira. That must have been really hard. Mira shrugged, like she'd long since accepted it. It's okay. The others take care of me, but they wanted me to check on you, to see if you were safe. We are, Daniel said. And we're trying to get off the island. Do you and the others want to come with us? Mira's eyes widened. You're leaving? We're going to try. For the first time, Mira smiled. It was a small, uncertain thing, but it was real. I'll ask the others, she said. Maybe they'll want to go too. She turned and disappeared back into the jungle before either of them could respond. Daniel and Victoria stood in silence for a long moment. We're not alone, Victoria said finally. No, Daniel said. We're not. And for the first time since the yacht sank, he felt something close to hope. Mira didn't return that day. Or the next. Daniel tried not to worry about it, but the silence gnawed at him. He kept replaying their brief conversation, wondering if he'd said something wrong, if the girl had been scared off. Victoria seemed less concerned, going about her tasks with the same focused efficiency she'd developed over the past weeks. But Daniel caught her glancing toward the jungle more often than usual. On the third day, he was gathering firewood when he heard voices. Multiple voices, speaking in low tones just beyond the tree line. He straightened slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the machete at his belt. Victoria, he called quietly. She emerged from the shelter, following his gaze. Together they watched as figures began to appear through the vegetation. Mira came first, her small frame pushing through the undergrowth with practiced ease. Behind her came three others. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, with sun-bleached hair and a wary expression. A woman in her 30s, rail-thin and weathered, carrying what looked like a spear made from aircraft metal. And an older man, maybe 60, limping slightly as he navigated the uneven ground. They all stopped at the edge of the clearing, maintaining a careful distance. These are the others, Mira said, her voice small but clear. This is Kellen. She pointed to the teenage boy. And Maria, and Ben. Hello? Daniel said, raising his hand slowly to show he wasn't armed. I'm Daniel. This is Victoria. Maria's eyes swept over their camp, taking in the shelter, the fire pit, the half-finished raft on the beach. Her grip on the spear didn't loosen. Mira says you're planning to leave, she said. Her accent was thick, Spanish maybe. On that? She nodded toward the raft. We're going to try, Daniel said. You'll die, Maria said flatly. The currents around this island, they pull everything back. We've tried 3 times, lost 2 people. The words hit Daniel like cold water. You've tried to leave? Of course we've tried, Ben said. His voice was rough, gravelly. You think we want to live here? We've been stranded for almost 3 years. Victoria stepped forward. 3 years? And no one's come looking for you? They did. At first. Kellen spoke for the first time, his voice quieter than Daniel expected. We saw helicopters maybe a month after the crash, but they never saw us. After that, nothing. Why didn't you signal them? Victoria asked. Fire, smoke, something? We did, Maria said. Burned half the jungle trying to get their attention. They still didn't see us. This island, it's not on most maps. Too small. Too remote. We're invisible. Daniel felt something sink in his chest. 3 years. These people had been here for 3 years and no one had found them. What chance did he and Victoria have? So you just gave up? Victoria's voice had an edge to it now. Accepted that you'd die here? Maria's expression hardened. We didn't give up. We survived. There's a difference. Maria, Ben said, his tone warning. They're not our enemies. We don't know what they are. They're people, Mira said quietly, like us. And they have food and fire. And they're nice. Maria looked at the girl, and something in her expression softened just slightly. She lowered the spear, but only a fraction. What do you want from us? She asked Daniel. Nothing, he said honestly. We didn't even know you were here until a few days ago. But if we're going to try to get off this island, maybe we should work together, pool resources, share information. And if your raft fails, Maria asked, what then? Then we try something else. Maria studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Victoria, her gaze sharp and assessing. Victoria met it without flinching. You're the CEO woman, Maria said. From that yacht that sank, we saw the wreckage wash up on the South Beach. Victoria's face went pale. There's wreckage? Not much, some debris, life vests, a piece of the hull with the name on it. Maria paused. No bodies. If there were other survivors, they didn't make it here. Victoria turned away, her shoulders tense. Daniel wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Come see our camp, Ben said, breaking the silence. If we're going to talk about working together, you should see what we've built. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a glance. Then they nodded. The journey to the caves took nearly an hour. Ben set a slow pace, his limp more pronounced over the rough terrain. Kellen stayed close to him, offering a steady hand when the older man stumbled. Mira walked beside Victoria, chattering quietly about the island, where to find the best fruit, which parts of the beach had the calmest water, which areas to avoid because of sharp rocks or sudden drop-offs. Maria led the way, her spear held loosely but ready. She didn't speak to Daniel or Victoria, didn't even look back to check if they were following. But Daniel noticed the way she positioned herself between them and the others, always maintaining a protective distance. When they finally reached the caves, Daniel understood why Maria was so cautious. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, accessible only by climbing across slick rocks that would be impossible to navigate at night or during heavy rain. Inside, the cave system opened into a series of chambers, some large enough to stand in, others barely wide enough to crawl through. But it was dry, protected, and clearly these people had made it home. They'd built sleeping platforms from salvaged aircraft seats and woven palm fronds. A central fire pit vented smoke through a natural chimney in the rock. Shelves carved into the cave walls held supplies: dried fish, coconut shells filled with fresh water, strips of fabric, tools fashioned from metal and stone. It's not much, Ben said, lowering himself onto one of the platforms with a wince. But it's kept us alive. It's incredible, Daniel said, and he meant it. You built all this? Over time, Kellen said. Took us months to get it right. We lost a lot of supplies early on. Made a lot of mistakes. We're still making mistakes, Maria said. She finally set down the spear, though Daniel noticed she kept it within arm's reach. But we learn. We adapt. Victoria was examining one of the shelves, running her fingers over the tools. This is good work. Organized. Efficient. You sound surprised, Maria said. I am. Most people would have fallen apart long before now. Most people don't have a choice. They sat around the fire pit, the five of them forming an uneasy circle. Mira curled up next to Maria, who put an arm around the girl without seeming to think about it. The gesture was so natural, so protective, that Daniel felt a sharp pang of longing for Jamie. Tell us about the currents, Victoria said. You said they pull everything back to the island? Maria nodded. There's a pattern. Every 8 to 10 days, the current shifts. For about 48 hours, it flows away from the island toward the shipping lanes to the north. That's when you'd have your best chance. But the water gets rough during those shifts, waves like you wouldn't believe. That's when we lost our people. How many have you lost? Daniel asked quietly. Ben looked down at his hands. 2. Both trying to leave. One drowned when his raft capsized. The other just disappeared. We found pieces of his boat washed up a week later. The cave fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. I'm sorry, Daniel said. We all are, Ben said. But we kept living. That's what they would have wanted. When's the next current shift? Victoria asked. 5 days, Kellen said. We've been tracking it. Same pattern every time. Victoria looked at Daniel. He could see the question in her eyes. 5 days. Barely enough time to prepare to reinforce the raft, to gather supplies. But it might be their only shot. We need a bigger raft, Daniel said, strong enough to hold all of us, and we need to time it exactly right. You want to take all of us? Maria asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. You said it yourself, working together is how we survive. If we're going to risk the currents, we do it with the best chance possible. That means more hands, more knowledge, more supplies. Maria shook her head. It's too dangerous. We barely have enough materials for a raft that size. And even if we build it, what makes you think it'll work this time? Because we'll do it better, Victoria said. Her voice had that CEO edge again, the tone that expected people to listen. You've learned from your mistakes. We've learned from ours. We combine that knowledge, build something stronger, plan it down to the last detail. We can do this. You sound very sure of yourself, Maria said. I am. People who are too sure get other people killed. People who don't try anything are already dead. They just haven't stopped breathing yet. The two women stared at each other across the fire. Daniel could feel the tension crackling between them, two different kinds of strength colliding. Let her try, Mira said softly. Please, Maria, I want to go home. Maria's expression cracked, just for a second. She pulled Mira closer. You don't remember home, Pequeña. You were too young. But I want to see it anyway. Don't you? Maria didn't answer. But Daniel saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes glistened in the firelight. We'll help, Ben said finally. Build the raft together, pool our resources. But we do this carefully, no unnecessary risks. Agreed, Daniel said. They talked late into the night, mapping out a plan. Kellen knew where to find the strongest wood on the island. Maria knew which vines held weight and which would snap. Ben had salvaged rope and canvas from the plane wreckage, stored in a hidden cache on the far side of the island. And Mira, despite her age, knew the island better than any of them, could navigate the jungle paths with her eyes closed. By the time they finished, the fire had burned down to embers. Victoria's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was something else there too. Something Daniel hadn't seen in weeks. Purpose. We should head back to our camp, Daniel said. Start gathering materials in the morning. You can stay here tonight, Ben offered. It's not safe to travel through the jungle in the dark. Too easy to lose your way. Daniel looked at Victoria. She nodded. They settled into one of the smaller chambers, away from the main fire. Someone had left them a blanket woven from plant fibers and a couple of aircraft seat cushions to sleep on. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than the ground. What do you think? Victoria asked quietly as they lay in the darkness. I think they've been through hell and they're still standing. That counts for something. Maria doesn't trust us. Can you blame her? We're strangers. For all she knows, we could make things worse. We won't. You can't promise that. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have to believe we won't. Otherwise, what's the point of trying? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of water dripping somewhere deeper in the cave system. Daniel? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah? Thank you for not giving up, for pulling me off that yacht, for all of it. He opened his eyes, though he couldn't see her in the darkness. You don't have to thank me. I do. Because I would have given up by now if it was just me. I know that. I would have laid down on that beach and waited to die. But you didn't. Because you didn't let me. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing, just listened to Victoria's breathing slowly even out as she drifted into sleep. He stayed awake longer, thinking about Jamie, about whether his son was okay, about whether Carol had told him his father was missing, or if she'd made up some story to keep him from worrying, about whether he'd ever get the chance to see Jamie's face again. He had to believe he would, had to believe that all of this effort, all of this struggle was leading somewhere. In the morning, they got to work. The next 5 days were the hardest Daniel had experienced since the yacht sank. They worked from dawn until well past dark, hauling materials through the jungle, constructing a raft that was 3 times the size of the one Daniel and Victoria had built alone. Kellen proved to be surprisingly skilled at engineering, able to calculate weight distribution and structural integrity in ways that reminded Daniel of the logistics work he used to do. Ben worked slowly but steadily, his experience evident in every knot he tied, every joint he reinforced. Maria remained skeptical, constantly pointing out flaws and weaknesses, but her criticism made the raft stronger. And Mira was everywhere, fetching tools, gathering supplies, keeping morale up with her relentless optimism. Victoria threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone. She didn't complain about the blisters on her hands or the sunburn across her shoulders. She just kept going, adapting to whatever task needed doing. Daniel watched her transform over those days, the polished CEO fading away to reveal something rawer underneath. Something that had maybe always been there, but had been buried under years of boardrooms and bottom lines. On the 3rd day, they had an accident. They were lashing the final support beams into place when one of the vines snapped. The beam swung loose, catching Victoria across the ribs and sending her sprawling. She hit the sand hard, the air knocked out of her. "Victoria!" Daniel dropped what he was holding and ran to her side. "Are you okay?" She tried to sit up and gasped, her face going white. "I'm fine, just give me a second." Maria was there a moment later, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she examined Victoria's side. "Lift your shirt," she ordered. Victoria complied, wincing as she moved. A dark bruise was already forming across her ribs, spreading like spilled ink. "Nothing's broken," Maria said after a moment. "But you're going to be sore for a while. No heavy lifting for the next few days." "We don't have a few days," Victoria said through gritted teeth. "The current shifts in 2 days. Then someone else will do the heavy lifting. You'll supervise." "I don't need to supervise. I need to help." Maria's expression hardened. "You want to help? Then don't make yourself useless by pushing too hard and making it worse. Use your brain instead of your body." For a second, Daniel thought Victoria was going to argue, but then she deflated, nodding slowly. "Okay, you're right." Maria helped her to her feet, surprisingly gentle. "Come on, let's get you back to the cave. You need to rest." Daniel watched them go, Victoria leaning slightly on Maria's arm. Kellen appeared beside him. "She's tougher than she looks," the boy said. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "She is." They finished the raft that evening. It was massive, sturdy, with a makeshift mast and sail fashioned from aircraft canvas. It wasn't pretty, but it looked like it could survive rough water. They dragged it to the launch point, a sheltered cove on the northern shore where the current would be strongest. Ben stood looking at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "I think it's the best chance we've had," Ben said. "But that doesn't mean it's a good chance." "You don't have to come. None of you do. This is a choice." Ben shook his head. "I've been on this island for 3 years. If I die trying to leave, at least I die doing something. That's better than just waiting." That night, they gathered in the cave one last time. Tomorrow, they would load the raft with supplies and wait for the current to shift. Then they would launch, all 6 of them, and hope that the ocean was kinder than it had been before. Victoria sat beside Daniel, her movements careful because of her ribs. She'd been quieter since the accident, more thoughtful. Now, as the others prepared for sleep, she leaned closer to him. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Sure." "I'm terrified." Daniel looked at her. In the firelight, she looked younger somehow, less guarded. "Me too. I keep thinking about what happens if we don't make it, if the raft breaks apart, or we get swept off course, or—" She stopped herself. "I've spent my whole life controlling things, making sure everything goes according to plan. But this? I can't control this, and it's killing me." "You don't have to control it," Daniel said. "You just have to trust that we've done everything we can. And if that's not enough, then at least we tried." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you were on that yacht. I know that sounds crazy, but if I had to be stranded with someone, I'm glad it was you." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Yeah, me too." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment. Then she pulled away, settling back against the cave wall. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But neither of them slept much that night. The current shifted just after dawn. They felt it before they saw it. A change in the water's rhythm, the waves pulling differently against the shore. Kellen confirmed it, wading out into the shallows and watching the way the water moved around his legs. "This is it," he said. "We have maybe 36 hours before it shifts back." They loaded the raft quickly, working together with the efficiency of people who'd learned to trust each other. Food and water secured in waterproof containers salvaged from the plane. The emergency beacon from Daniel and Victoria's original lifeboat still blinking its hopeful red light. Extra rope, tools, a tarp for shelter. Everything they thought they might need. Mira climbed aboard first, settling herself in the center of the raft where it was most stable. Ben followed, then Kellen. Maria hesitated, one hand on the edge of the raft, her eyes scanning the horizon. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "Just thinking about the ones who didn't make it," she said quietly, "hoping we're not about to join them." "We won't." Maria looked at him, and for the first time, something like trust flickered in her expression. You better be right. She climbed aboard. Victoria went next, moving gingerly because of her ribs. Daniel went last, pushing the raft into deeper water before hauling himself up. They were off. The first few hours were almost peaceful. The current carried them steadily northward, away from the island. They took turns paddling, keeping the raft on course, watching as the island grew smaller and smaller behind them. Mira sat next to Ben, her hand gripping his shirt like she was afraid she might float away. How far do you think we need to go? Victoria asked. Until we hit the shipping lanes, Kellen said. Ben saw a cargo ship pass by about a year ago, maybe 50 miles north of the island. 50 miles, Victoria repeated. And we're moving at what, 2 miles an hour? Maybe 3 if the current holds. Daniel did the math in his head. 17 hours, give or take. They could do that. They had enough water, enough food. They just had to keep moving. But around midday, the wind picked up. It started as a breeze, pleasant and cooling. Then it grew stronger, whipping the sail and pushing the raft off course. Daniel and Kellen fought to keep them steady, adjusting the sail, paddling hard against the wind. But it kept getting worse. Storm's coming, Ben said, his voice grim. He was looking at the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering with alarming speed. We knew this might happen, Maria said. We just have to ride it out. But as the first drops of rain began to fall, Daniel felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't like the storm that had sunk the yacht. This was different, faster, more violent. The waves grew, each one bigger than the last. The raft began to pitch and roll, water sloshing over the sides. Mira started to cry, and Maria pulled her close, wrapping both arms around the girl. Hold on, Daniel shouted over the rising wind. Everyone hold on! The storm hit with the force of a freight train. 1 second they were riding waves, the next they were being tossed like a toy. Daniel gripped the edge of the raft so hard his fingers went numb. He could barely see through the rain, barely hear over the roar of wind and water. A massive wave crashed over them, and suddenly Victoria was sliding toward the edge. Her hand scrabbled for purchase, but the wood was too slick. Daniel lunged for her, catching her wrist just as she went over the side. The weight of her nearly pulled him in too, but Kellen grabbed his legs, anchoring him. Pull her up, Kellen shouted. Daniel pulled with everything he had. His shoulder screamed in protest, the same one he'd injured when the yacht sank. But he didn't let go, couldn't let go. Victoria's other hand found the edge of the raft. Together, they hauled her back aboard. She collapsed onto the deck, gasping and shaking. Thank you, she managed. Thank you. Another wave hit. This one was even bigger, a towering wall of water that seemed to block out the sky. The raft tilted at an impossible angle, and for a moment Daniel was sure they were going to capsize. Then they were falling, dropping down the face of the wave, the raft slamming into the trough with bone-jarring force. Something cracked. A support beam, maybe, or one of the mast supports. Daniel couldn't tell. All he knew was that the raft was coming apart. We're breaking up, Maria shouted. We need to... She didn't finish. Another wave, another impact, and suddenly the raft split down the middle. People were screaming, water everywhere. Daniel grabbed for Victoria again, but the current tore them apart. He went under, the ocean closing over his head, cold and dark and endless. He kicked for the surface, broke through, gulped air. Victoria, he shouted. Mira, anyone. He saw Ben clinging to a piece of the raft, saw Kellen swimming toward him, but he couldn't see the others. Another wave rolled over him, and when he surfaced again, he'd lost sight of everyone. The storm raged for hours, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning in the chaos. Daniel just kept swimming, kept fighting to stay afloat, kept calling out names that the wind tore away. Eventually the storm began to ease. The waves grew smaller. The rain softened. And Daniel, exhausted beyond measure, found himself clinging to a piece of wreckage, alone in the vast ocean. He called out again, his voice hoarse. Victoria! Ben! Anyone! Nothing. Just the sound of water and his own ragged breathing. Then, in the distance, he heard it. A voice. Faint, but unmistakable. Daniel! He turned, scanning the water. There. Maybe 50 yards away. Victoria, clinging to another piece of the raft. Relief flooded through him so intense it was almost painful. I'm coming, he shouted. He let go of his wreckage and started swimming. His arms felt like lead. his legs barely responding, but he kept going, stroke after stroke, until he reached her. She grabbed onto him, and he grabbed onto her, and for a moment they just held each other, both of them shaking and gasping. "The others," Victoria said. "Did you see? Ben and Kellen were together. I don't know about Maria and Mira." Victoria's face crumpled. "We lost them. After everything, we lost them." "We don't know that. We just have to keep looking." They searched for the next hour, calling out, swimming from one piece of wreckage to another, but they found no one, just debris from the shattered raft, scattered across the water like broken promises. Finally, as the sun began to set, Daniel had to accept the truth. The others were gone, either dead or swept so far away that they might as well be. It was just him and Victoria now, again, like it had been from the beginning. They found a larger piece of the raft, big enough for both of them to climb onto. They lay there, exhausted and heartbroken, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to black. "We failed," Victoria said quietly. "We tried. It wasn't enough." Daniel didn't respond. What could he say? She was right. They tried to be smart, to be careful, to do everything right, and people had still died. Victoria rolled onto her side, facing away from him. He could hear her crying, soft and broken. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. So he just lay there, staring up at the stars, thinking about Jamie and wondering if he'd ever see his son again. Sometime in the night, Victoria reached back and found his hand. She didn't say anything, just held on, her grip tight and desperate. Daniel held on too, because it was all they had left. Dawn came slowly, the sky bleeding from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. Daniel woke to find Victoria still asleep beside him, her hand still gripping his. Her face was streaked with salt and dried tears, her breathing shallow but steady. He didn't want to move, didn't want to face another day of this, but the sun was already heating the wreckage beneath them, and they needed to figure out what came next. "Victoria," he said quietly. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For just a second, she looked peaceful. Then memory flooded back and her expression crumbled. "They're really gone," she said. Not a question, a statement. "We don't know that for sure." "Daniel, don't. I mean it. The current could have carried them somewhere else. They could have made it to land or found another piece of the raft. Or—" "Stop!" Victoria sat up, pulling her hand away. "Just stop. I can't do this. I can't keep hoping when there's nothing left to hope for." Daniel sat up too, his body protesting every movement. "So what do you want to do? Give up?" "I want to be realistic. We're floating in the middle of the ocean with no food, no water, and no way to get help. The beacon went down with the raft. We have nothing. We have each other." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not enough. It was never going to be enough." Daniel felt anger flare in his chest. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't know how bad this is? But sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves isn't going to change anything. And what will change it? Your optimism? Your refusal to acknowledge reality? My refusal to quit." They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed and furious. Daniel could feel his own exhaustion like a weight pressing down on him. "I had a life," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "A company. People who depended on me. And now what? I'm going to die out here because I was too proud to cancel a stupid corporate retreat?" "You're not going to die." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I won't let you." Victoria shook her head, looking away. "You can't control this, Daniel. Neither of us can." They fell into silence. The water around them was calm now, the storm's fury completely spent. Daniel scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of land or rescue, but there was nothing, just endless ocean in every direction. He checked their piece of wreckage. It was maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, part of what had been the raft's deck, sturdy enough to hold them both, but not much else. There was a small compartment still attached to one corner. Daniel pried it open and found a single water bottle, half full, and a package of dried fish that had somehow stayed sealed. "We've got supplies," he said, holding them up. Victoria looked at them like they were a cruel joke. "That's maybe 1 day's worth. 2, if we're careful. Then we'll be careful." He handed her the water bottle. She took it but didn't drink, just held it in her lap. "I keep thinking about Mira," she said quietly. "She was just a kid. She should have had a whole life ahead of her. And instead, don't, Daniel said. Don't do that to yourself. Why not? It's my fault. I'm the one who convinced them to try. I'm the one who said we could make it work. We all made that choice. Maria, Ben, Kellen, they knew the risks. That doesn't make it hurt less. Daniel had no answer for that. He took the water bottle from her and drank just enough to wet his throat. Then he handed it back. They spent the day drifting. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Daniel used his shirt to create a small patch of shade for Victoria. She protested at first, but he insisted, and eventually she gave in. Her ribs were bothering her more now, he could tell. She winced every time she moved. Around midday, they saw a ship in the distance. Just a dark smudge on the horizon, but unmistakably man-made. Daniel shouted until his voice gave out, waving his arms frantically. Victoria joined in, both of them screaming themselves hoarse. But the ship didn't change course. It just kept moving, parallel to them, until it disappeared over the horizon. Victoria sank back down onto the wreckage, her shoulders shaking. They didn't see us. We'll try again if we see another one. There won't be another one. We're too far off the shipping lanes. That was our chance and we missed it. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She looked at him, her expression hollow. I know you're trying to keep me going. I know you think if you just stay positive enough, everything will work out. But it won't, Daniel. We're going to die out here. And pretending otherwise is just making it worse. Daniel felt something crack inside him. You want me to give up? Is that what you want? You want me to just accept that I'm never going to see my son again? Victoria flinched. That's not what I... Because I can't do that. I won't. Jamie is waiting for me. He needs me. And I'm not going to abandon him. You didn't abandon him. This isn't your fault. It feels like my fault. Every second I'm out here instead of with him feels like a failure. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Tell me about him, Jamie. Daniel hesitated. Talking about his son felt dangerous, like it might break something fundamental inside him. But he also wanted to. Needed to, maybe. He's 7, Daniel said. Smart as hell. Wants to be an astronaut. He's got this gap between his front teeth that makes him look like a mischievous squirrel. He smiled despite himself. His mom left when he was 2. Just decided one day that she didn't want to be a mother anymore and walked out. So it's been just the 2 of us ever since. That must have been hard. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not her leaving. That was hell. But getting to be Jamie's dad? Getting to be the one he runs to when he's scared or excited or just wants to show me a picture he drew? That's everything. Victoria's eyes were wet. He's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. They sat in silence for a while, the water lapping gently against the wreckage. Daniel thought about bedtime stories and scraped knees and the way Jamie laughed when Daniel tickled him. He thought about all the moments he might never get back. I don't have anyone like that, Victoria said finally. No one who needs me the way Jamie needs you. My parents are dead. I don't have siblings. Don't have close friends, really. Just employees and business associates. What about relationships? Someone you were seeing? Victoria shook her head. I dated in college, had a few serious boyfriends, but after I took over the company, there wasn't time. Or maybe I just didn't make time. I don't know. It seemed easier to focus on work, on building something that mattered. The company matters. Does it? What's the point of running a billion-dollar enterprise if you die alone with no one to miss you? Someone will miss you, your employees, they'll miss what I did for them, the paychecks, the strategy. But me? The actual person? I don't think anyone knows her well enough to miss her. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. The sun had burned her skin, turning it pink and raw. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her expensive clothes were torn and salt-stained. She looked nothing like the CEO he'd seen from across the warehouse. She looked human, breakable, real. I would miss you, he said. Victoria met his eyes. You barely know me. I know you've been stubborn and brave and stronger than you think you are. I know you haven't complained once about your ribs, even though I can see they're killing you. I know you cried for Mira when you thought I was asleep. I know enough. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're a good person, Daniel Cross. I'm just a guy trying to get home. You're more than that. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged. Then Victoria looked away, breaking it. We should ration the water, she said. Make it last as long as possible. They divided the supplies carefully. 1 sip of water every 4 hours. A small piece of fish morning and night. It wasn't enough to satisfy hunger or thirst, but it was something. By the second day, Daniel's lips were cracked and bleeding. Victoria's too. They barely talked, conserving energy. Just lay side by side on the wreckage, watching clouds drift past overhead. On the third day, Victoria got worse. She'd been fighting a fever since the night before, her skin hot to the touch despite the cool water around them. Now she was shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. "I'm fine," she said when Daniel tried to check on her, but her voice was weak, thready. "You're not fine, something's wrong." "Just tired, need to sleep." But Daniel could see it wasn't just exhaustion. Her breathing was too fast, too shallow. And when he checked her ribs, the bruising had spread, dark purple and sickly green. "I think you've got an infection," he said. Victoria laughed weakly. "Of course I do, because this wasn't bad enough already. We need to keep you cool, get the fever down." He soaked his shirt in seawater and laid it across her forehead. She winced at the cold but didn't protest. Daniel stayed close, monitoring her breathing, watching for signs that she was getting worse. As night fell, Victoria's fever spiked. She started mumbling, half delirious, talking to people who weren't there. "Dad, I did what you asked," she said, her eyes unfocused. "I saved the company, made it bigger, better. Are you proud? Dad?" Daniel's chest tightened. He took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm here, Victoria. You're okay. No one's here, I'm always alone. Even when there are people everywhere, I'm alone. You're not alone now." She looked at him, her eyes glassy with fever. "Daniel?" "Yeah, it's me. I'm scared." "I know. I don't want to die." "You're not going to." She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. "Promise me. If I don't make it, promise me you'll get back to Jamie. Tell him—" She stopped, struggling for words. "Tell him his dad was brave. Tell him that. You can tell him yourself when we get back." "Daniel, no, I'm not making that promise because you're going to be fine. We both are." Victoria's eyes drifted closed. "You're a terrible liar." He stayed awake all night, keeping watch over her. Every time her breathing changed, every time she shifted or moaned, his heart jumped. He kept the wet shirt on her forehead, kept talking to her even when she didn't respond, kept holding her hand like it was the only thing tethering her to life. When dawn came, Victoria's fever had broken. She was still weak, still pale, but her eyes were clearer. "You stayed up all night," she said, her voice hoarse. "Someone had to." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." But something had changed. Daniel could feel it in the air, in the way the water moved beneath them. He scanned the horizon and saw it. Land. It was just a dark line against the sky, but it was there, solid, real. "Victoria," he said, his voice shaking. "Look." She turned her head, following his gaze. Her breath caught. "Is that—" "Yeah." They stared at it, neither quite believing. After everything, after all the loss and pain and desperation, there was land. Daniel started paddling with his hands, kicking with his legs, pushing the wreckage toward the distant shore. Victoria helped as much as she could, though her movements were weak and uncoordinated. It took hours. The sun climbed high, then started to descend again. Daniel's arms burned, his legs cramped, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when they were this close. As they drew nearer, Daniel could make out details. A beach, trees, and something else. Something that made his heart leap into his throat. Buildings, small ones, but unmistakably human-made. "There are people there," Victoria said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Daniel, there are people." They pushed harder. The wreckage scraped against a sandbar, and Daniel jumped into the shallow water, pulling it the rest of the way to shore. Victoria climbed off slowly, her legs barely holding her. They collapsed onto the beach together, gasping and shaking. "We made it," Victoria said. "We actually made it." Daniel couldn't speak. He just lay there, feeling solid ground beneath him for the first time in days, and tried not to cry. A voice called out in a language Daniel didn't understand. He lifted his head and saw people running toward them, fishermen maybe, or villagers. They were shouting, pointing, moving with urgent purpose. Strong hands lifted Daniel to his feet. Someone wrapped a blanket around Victoria. A woman was pressing a water bottle to Daniel's lips, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Indonesian or Malay. "My friend," Daniel managed, pointing at Victoria. "She's hurt. She needs a doctor." The woman nodded vigorously, calling to the others. They brought a stretcher, loading Victoria onto it with surprising gentleness. She reached for Daniel's hand as they lifted her. "Don't leave me," she said. "I won't, I promise." They were carried to the village, a small collection of houses clustered near the shore. Someone ran ahead, and by the time they arrived, an older man with medical supplies was waiting. He examined Victoria quickly, his hands skilled and confident, then started giving orders. Daniel tried to follow, but exhaustion finally caught up with him. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto a bench outside the medical hut. Someone brought him food, rice and fish and fresh water. He ate mechanically, barely tasting it. Time passed in a blur. People came and went, speaking in their language, occasionally gesturing at him with concern or curiosity. Daniel answered their questions as best he could, though he had no idea if they understood him. Finally, the old man emerged from the hut. He said something to Daniel, smiling and nodding. "She's okay?" Daniel asked. "Victoria's okay?" The man seemed to understand. He nodded again, more emphatic this time, and gestured for Daniel to follow. Victoria was lying on a cot, an IV in her arm, her ribs properly bandaged. She looked pale, but stable. When she saw Daniel, she smiled. "Hey," she said weakly. "Hey yourself. They're giving me antibiotics and fluids and something for the pain that's making everything feel very floaty." "Good. You need it. They said a boat comes through here every few days, brings supplies, takes people to the mainland. We can get on it. Go home." Home. The word hit Daniel like a physical blow. Jamie, Carol, his apartment, his life. It was all waiting for him, had been this whole time, and now he could actually get back to it. "When's the next boat?" he asked. 3 days? 3 days. After everything, that seemed like nothing. They could wait 3 days. They'd waited this long. "We're going to make it," Victoria said. "We're actually going to make it." "Yeah," Daniel said. "We are." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her cot, taking her hand. She squeezed it gently, her eyes already drifting closed. "Stay with me?" she asked. "I'm not going anywhere." And he didn't. He stayed beside her as she slept, as the villagers brought him food and clean clothes, as the sun set and rose and set again. He stayed because he'd promised he would, and because some part of him wasn't ready to let go yet. 3 days later, the boat arrived. It was a small cargo vessel, rusty and weather-beaten, but it might as well have been a luxury yacht. The captain spoke broken English and agreed to take them to the nearest city with an airport. The villagers helped them aboard, waving as the boat pulled away from shore. Daniel stood at the railing, watching the island disappear behind them. Victoria stood beside him, still weak but getting stronger every day. "Do you think they made it?" she asked quietly. "The others? I don't know. I hope so." "Me too." They were quiet for a moment. Then Victoria said, "What happens when we get back? To the real world?" Daniel had been trying not to think about that. "I go home to Jamie, figure out if I still have a job. Try to explain where I've been." "And us?" "What do you mean?" Victoria looked at him. "This. Whatever this is between us. Does it just end when we get on that plane?" Daniel didn't know how to answer, because the truth was complicated. He and Victoria came from different worlds, had completely different lives. What had worked on an island? What had made sense when survival was the only thing that mattered? Would any of that translate to reality? "I don't know," he said honestly. Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand." But something in her expression told Daniel she didn't, not really. The journey to the city took 2 days. When they finally docked, it felt surreal. Cars, buildings, people everywhere rushing around with phones and briefcases and coffee cups. The modern world, exactly as Daniel had left it, completely indifferent to everything he'd been through. The authorities were waiting at the port. Someone had radioed ahead, alerting them to the survivors. There were questions, so many questions. Police, Coast Guard, Representatives from Hale Industries who looked at Victoria with relief and then immediately started talking about press statements and damage control. Daniel answered what he could, gave his statement, accepted the clean clothes and temporary housing they offered. Through it all, he kept checking his phone, which someone had returned to him from his apartment. There were dozens of missed calls from Carol, from Jamie's school, from his supervisor at work. And then there was a voicemail from Jamie, recorded 2 weeks after the yacht sank. "Dad? Carol said you're on a business trip, but I don't believe her because you always call me before bed and you haven't called in forever. I miss you. Please come home soon. I finished the science project by myself and Mrs. Patterson said it was really good. I wish you could have seen it. I love you, Dad. Come home." Daniel played it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Then he called Carol. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel? Oh my God, Daniel, is that really you?" "It's me. I'm okay. I'm alive. Is Jamie?" "He's at school." "Daniel, we thought you were dead. They found pieces of the yacht. They said there were no survivors." I didn't know what to tell him. "I'm coming home. Today. Can you pick him up from school? I want to be there when he gets home." Of course. Yes. Daniel, I'm so glad you're okay." He hung up and immediately looked into flights. The next one left in 4 hours. He booked it without hesitation. Victoria found him in the hotel lobby where they'd been temporarily housed. She looked different in clean clothes, her hair washed and styled, her makeup carefully applied, like the CEO again. But her eyes were the same. "You're leaving," she said. "I have to. Jamie, I know, I understand." They stood awkwardly, the space between them suddenly enormous. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "What happens now?" Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Back to work. The board has probably been fighting over my replacement. I need to remind them who's actually in charge." "Right. Daniel, Victoria." They both stopped. Victoria laughed, a sound that was almost genuine. "You go first," she said. "I was just going to say thank you for everything. You kept me going out there. When I wanted to give up, you pushed me to keep trying." "That's not how I remember it." "Well, that's how it was." Victoria reached out and took his hand. "You saved my life, Daniel. Multiple times. I won't forget that." "You saved mine too." They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Daniel wanted to say more, wanted to acknowledge the thing that had grown between them on that island, but the words stuck in his throat. "I should go," he said finally. "My flight. Go. Don't keep Jamie waiting." Daniel squeezed her hand once more, then let go. He picked up his small bag and headed for the door. At the threshold, he turned back. Victoria was still standing there, watching him. She raised one hand in a small wave. Daniel waved back. Then he walked out into the bright chaos of the city and didn't look back again. The flight home was the longest of his life. Every minute felt like an hour. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely sit still. All he could think about was Jamie. When the plane finally landed, Daniel practically ran through the airport. He caught a taxi, gave the driver his address, and watched the familiar streets blur past. Carol was waiting on the front steps of his apartment building. She stood when she saw him, her hand over her mouth. "Daniel," she breathed. He hugged her quickly. "Where is he?" "Inside. I told him you were coming, but I don't think he believed me." Daniel took the stairs 2 at a time. He burst through the apartment door and there, sitting on the living room floor with his markers and paper, was his son. Jamie looked up. His eyes went wide. "Dad?" "Hey, buddy." Jamie dropped his marker and ran. Daniel caught him, lifting him up, holding him so tight he was probably squeezing too hard. But Jamie was squeezing back just as hard, his small arms wrapped around Daniel's neck. "You came back," Jamie said, his voice muffled against Daniel's shoulder. "Carol said you would, but I thought maybe you wouldn't." "I'll always come back to you, always." "Where were you?" "It's a long story. I'll tell you all about it. But right now, I just want to be here with you." They stayed like that for a long time, Daniel holding his son, Jamie refusing to let go. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like he could breathe. Later, after Jamie had finally calmed down enough to eat dinner, after Carol had left with promises to check in tomorrow, after Daniel had tucked his son into bed and read him 3 stories instead of the usual one, he sat alone in his living room. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I hope you made it home safely. I hope Jamie was as happy to see you as I imagine he was. Thank you for everything, Daniel. I mean that. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed out a reply. Made it home. Jamie's good. Hope you're settling back in okay. Take care of yourself. He hesitated before sending it. Then he added one more line. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. The response came almost immediately. I'll remember that. Daniel set his phone down and leaned back against the couch. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening noise. Inside, Jamie slept peacefully down the hall. Everything was exactly as it should be. So why did it feel like something was missing? The first week back felt like living in two worlds at once. Daniel would be helping Jamie with homework or making dinner, doing all the normal things he dreamed about on that island. And then something would trigger a memory. The sound of rain against the window, the smell of salt air when he passed the waterfront. And suddenly, he'd be back there, clinging to wreckage in the middle of the ocean, watching Victoria's fever spike while he felt completely helpless. Jamie noticed. Kids always did. Dad, you're doing it again, he said one evening. They were sitting at the kitchen table, Jamie working on math problems while Daniel pretended to read the newspaper. Doing what, buddy? Staring at nothing, like you're somewhere else. Daniel folded the paper. Sorry, just thinking. About where you were when you were gone? Daniel had told Jamie a simplified version of what happened. A boat trip for work. A storm. Being stranded on an island. He'd left out the deaths, the desperation, the moments when he'd truly believed he wouldn't make it home. Jamie didn't need to carry that weight. Yeah, Daniel said. Sometimes. Jamie set down his pencil. Was it scary? Sometimes it was. What did you do when you were scared? Daniel thought about it. I thought about you, about coming home to you. That helped. Jamie nodded seriously, like this made perfect sense. Then he went back to his math problems, and Daniel went back to pretending to read, and life continued in its familiar rhythm. But at night, when Jamie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel would take out his phone and look at Victoria's last text. He never responded to it. Didn't know what he'd say if he did. But he kept looking at it anyway. 2 weeks after he got back, his supervisor called him into the office. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers on his desk that didn't need shuffling. So Daniel, good to have you back. Really good. Thanks. It's good to be back. About your position. Daniel's stomach dropped. I'm being let go. What? No, nothing like that. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. The opposite, actually. Corporate wants to offer you a promotion. Logistics manager. Better pay, better hours. You'd be overseeing the whole department instead of just processing manifests. Daniel stared at him. Why? Why? Marcus laughed. Because you survived a yacht sinking and 3 weeks stranded on an island. That kind of resourcefulness, that problem solving under pressure, corporate thinks those are exactly the skills they need in management. That's not how logistics management works. Maybe not, but they're offering anyway. You interested? Daniel thought about it. Better pay would help with Jamie. Better hours meant more time at home. It made sense to say yes. But something about it felt wrong. Like he was being rewarded for the worst experience of his life. Can I think about it? He asked. Sure. Take a few days. Daniel left the office more confused than when he'd entered. On his way out, he ran into someone he didn't recognize. A young woman with a professional smile and a Hale Industries ID badge. Mr. Cross, I'm Sarah Chen from Corporate Communications. Do you have a moment? I'm kind of in a hurry. This won't take long. Ms. Hale wanted me to reach out. She's planning a memorial service for the yacht incident to honor those who were lost. She'd like you to attend, maybe say a few words. Daniel felt like he'd been punched. A memorial service. Yes. Next Friday at the downtown office. It would mean a lot to the families if you could be there. As one of the survivors, your perspective would be, I'll think about it, Daniel said, cutting her off. Then he walked away before she could say anything else. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the others, about Ben and Kellen and Maria and Mira, about whether their families even knew what had happened, about whether they'd ever been found. At 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to his laptop. He searched for news about the yacht sinking, about rescue operations, about anything. Most of the articles focused on Victoria, the CEO who survived against all odds. There were a few mentions of Daniel, but always in passing. The logistics worker who was also rescued. An afterthought. He found one article that mentioned the others. 4 people still missing, presumed dead. Their names weren't listed. They were just statistics. Daniel closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. The memorial service was held in the top-floor conference room of Hale Industries headquarters. Daniel had never been in this building before. The lobby alone probably cost more than his entire apartment. Everything was marble and glass and expensive art that he didn't understand. He almost turned around and left 3 times before he made it to the elevator. The conference room was packed. Families, employees, board members, everyone dressed in black, speaking in hushed tones. A large photo montage played on screens around the room, showing faces of people who'd been on the yacht. Daniel recognized a few from the lower cabin. Most he'd never seen before. He found a seat near the back, trying to be invisible. Victoria was at the front of the room, speaking with an older couple. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the strain in her expression. She was in full CEO mode, composed, professional, every word carefully chosen. But he could see the cracks if he looked closely enough. Their eyes met across the room. For just a second, something passed between them. Recognition. Shared pain. Then someone else approached Victoria, and the moment was gone. The service began. A board member gave a speech about tragedy and resilience. Another executive talked about the company's commitment to safety. It all felt rehearsed, performative. Daniel tuned most of it out. Then Victoria took the podium. "I don't have a prepared speech," she began. Her voice was steady but quiet. "I've been trying to write one all week, but every time I start, it feels wrong, like I'm trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense." She paused, her hands gripping the podium. 15 people died when that yacht sank. 15 people who had families, friends, lives that mattered. I knew some of them. Worked with them for years. Others I'd never met. But they were all there because of me. Because I wanted to do a corporate retreat. Because I thought it would be good for morale. Someone in the audience shifted uncomfortably. "I can't undo that," Victoria continued. "I can't bring them back. All I can do is promise that I'll remember them, that this company will remember them, that we'll do better." She stepped back from the podium. There was scattered applause, uncertain and thin. Then Victoria's eyes found Daniel again. "I'd like to invite Daniel Cross to say a few words. He was one of the survivors. And he's one of the bravest people I know." Every head in the room turned to look at him. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to refuse, to stay in his seat, to leave. But Victoria was still looking at him, and there was something in her expression that was almost pleading. He stood, walked to the front of the room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. At the podium, he looked out at the crowd of strangers and didn't know what to say. "I'm not good at speeches," he started. I'm a logistics guy. I process manifests. I don't do this." A few people smiled politely. "But I was there, and I want you to know that the people who died weren't just names on a list. They were real. They fought. They tried to survive. And some of them almost made it." His voice cracked. He took a breath. "After the yacht sank, we found other survivors. People who'd been stranded on an island for years after a plane crash. There was a girl named Mira. She was maybe 11 years old. She'd lost her parents in the crash, but she was still..." He stopped, collecting himself. "She was still hopeful, still brave. And we tried to get her off that island. We built a raft together. We thought we could make it." The room was completely silent now. "We didn't make it. The raft broke apart in a storm. And Mira and the others, He couldn't finish. "I don't know if their families are here. I don't even know if anyone knows they existed. But they did. They were real. And they deserve better than they got." He stepped away from the podium before anyone could respond. Victoria caught his arm as he passed. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel just nodded and kept walking. He made it to the elevator before the tears came. He was sitting in his car in the parking garage, trying to pull himself together, when someone knocked on the window. Victoria. He rolled down the window. "Can I get in?" she asked. Daniel unlocked the passenger door. Victoria slid into the seat, still in her black dress and heels, looking completely out of place in his beat-up sedan. "That was harder than I thought it would be," she said. "Which part?" "All of it. Seeing everyone, talking about what happened, seeing you? Daniel looked at her. Why is seeing me hard? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Because when I look at you, I remember everything, the good and the bad, and I don't know what to do with that. You're doing fine, back to work, back in control. That's what you wanted, right? I thought it was. She picked at a thread on her dress. But it turns out running a company feels a lot less important when you've spent 3 weeks thinking you were going to die. So what are you going to do? I don't know. That's the problem. For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know what comes next. Daniel understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. You'll figure it out. Will I? Victoria looked at him. What about you? What comes next for Daniel Cross? I go back to my life, raise my kid, do my job, same as before. Is that what you want? It's what I have. That's not what I asked. Daniel didn't have an answer. He stared out the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking garage and tried to figure out what he wanted. Not what made sense or what was practical, but what he actually wanted. I don't know either, he said finally. Victoria reached over and took his hand. Her skin was soft, warm. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Yeah. They sat like that for a while, holding hands in comfortable silence. Then Victoria's phone buzzed. She looked at it and sighed. I have to go. The board wants to meet. Of course they do. She squeezed his hand once more before letting go. Don't be a stranger, Daniel. We survived too much together for you to just disappear. I won't. But as she got out of the car and walked away, Daniel wondered if he was lying. The promotion offer was still on the table. Daniel had been avoiding Marcus's calls for a week, but he couldn't put it off forever. He needed to make a decision. Jamie was the one who helped him figure it out, without even knowing he was doing it. They were at the park on a Saturday afternoon, Jamie on the swings while Daniel pushed. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, a light breeze carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass. Higher, Dad, Jamie shouted, his legs pumping. You're already pretty high, buddy. But I want to touch the sky. Daniel pushed harder, watching his son soar up and back, his laughter bright and uncomplicated. Dad, Jamie called down. When I grow up, do I have to do the same job as you? What? No, you can do whatever you want. What if I want to be an astronaut? Then you work hard in school and you become an astronaut. What if I want to be something else, something different? Daniel slowed the swing, bringing Jamie to a gentle stop. Then you do that instead. The point isn't what you choose. The point is that you choose something that makes you happy. Jamie thought about this. Are you happy with your job? The question hit Daniel harder than it should have. It's a good job. It pays the bills. But does it make you happy? Daniel looked at his son's earnest face and realized he didn't have a good answer. The logistics work was fine, safe, predictable. But happy? He couldn't remember the last time it had made him happy. You know what, buddy? I think maybe I need to figure that out. On Monday, Daniel went to Marcus's office. I appreciate the offer, he said. I really do, but I'm going to pass. Marcus blinked. You're passing on a promotion? Yeah. Can I ask why? Daniel had spent the whole weekend thinking about his answer. Because I don't think I want to be a logistics manager. I don't even know if I want to be in logistics anymore. And I need to figure out what I do want before I commit to something bigger. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Fair enough. But Daniel, don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. I know. Thanks anyway. That evening, Daniel did something he'd been putting off. He texted Victoria. Are you free this week? Want to grab coffee? Her response came quickly. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. I'll send you the address. The coffee shop was in a neighborhood Daniel had never been to, the kind of place where a latte cost more than his usual lunch. Victoria was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. I ordered for you, she said. Hope that's okay. I figured you'd want something straightforward. Daniel sat down and took a sip. It was good. Better than good, actually. Thanks. You sounded cryptic in your text. Everything okay? Yeah, I wanted to talk about everything. Victoria set down her cup. Okay, I'm listening. Daniel had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but now that he was here, the words felt clumsy. I turned down a promotion at work. They wanted to make me a manager and I said no. Why? Because I realized I was just going through the motions, doing what made sense instead of what I wanted. And I thought, after everything we went through, after almost dying, I thought maybe I should stop doing that. Victoria's expression softened. What do you want, Daniel? I don't know yet, but I know I want more than just surviving. I want to actually live. That's a good start. What about you? Are you happy? Running the company? Being back in control? Victoria laughed, but it was a sad sound. You want the truth? I'm miserable. I go to meetings and listen to people argue about market share and quarterly projections, and all I can think is how pointless it all is, how none of it matters. It matters to the people who work for you, their jobs, their livelihoods. I know, and that's the only thing keeping me there. But Daniel, I'm 30 years old, and I've spent the last decade building an empire I don't even care about. My father's empire, really. I just made it bigger. So do something different. Like what? I don't know. What did you want to be before you took over the company? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to teach. History, maybe, or economics. I liked the idea of helping people understand complex systems, making them accessible. So teach. It's not that simple. I have responsibilities, a board that depends on me, thousands of employees. You can find someone to run the company, someone who actually wants to be there. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, but it's possible, if you actually want it. Victoria stared at her coffee. I don't know what I want anymore. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Then maybe it's time to figure it out. They talked for 2 hours, their coffee going cold as they hashed through fears and possibilities and all the ways their lives had changed. It was the most honest conversation Daniel had had with anyone in months, maybe years. As they were leaving, Victoria stopped him at the door. Can I ask you something? Sure. On the island, when I was sick and delirious, do you remember what I said? Daniel remembered every word. You talked about your father, about wanting to make him proud. Did I say anything else? He hesitated. You said you were always alone. Victoria nodded slowly. I meant it. I've been alone for so long I forgot what it feels like not to be. She looked up at him. But with you, on that island, I didn't feel alone. Neither did I. So what do we do about that? Daniel didn't have an answer. The space between what he felt and what made sense was too big to bridge with words. I don't know, he said honestly. You're still a CEO. I'm still a single dad working a job I'm not sure I want. Our lives don't exactly line up. They could, if we wanted them to. Victoria, I know it's complicated. I know there's Jamie to think about, and your job, and my job, and a million other reasons why this doesn't make sense. But Daniel, I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what we had on that island. What we had on that island was survival. This is real life. It's different. Does it have to be? Daniel wanted to say yes, wanted to explain all the reasons why it couldn't work, why they should just go their separate ways and remember the island as something that happened to them, not something that defined them. But he couldn't, because she was right. He couldn't stop thinking about her either. I need time, he said, to figure out what I want. What's best for Jamie? I can't just jump into something without thinking it through. Victoria's face fell, but she nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need. She left first, walking out into the afternoon sunlight. Daniel stayed behind, watching her go, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 weeks passed. Daniel threw himself into being present with Jamie, into figuring out what he wanted from his career, into building a life that felt intentional instead of accidental. He updated his resume, started looking at different job opportunities, started imagining a future that looked different from his past. And he thought about Victoria. Every single day he thought about her. Jamie noticed, of course. Dad, who's Victoria? He asked one evening. Daniel looked up from the dishes. What? You said her name in your sleep last night. Daniel set down the plate he was washing. She's someone I was on the island with. We survived together. Is she your friend? Yeah, I think so. Then why don't you ever talk to her? It's complicated, buddy. Jamie made a face. That's what grown-ups always say when they're being dumb. Hey, It's true. If she's your friend, you should talk to her. That's what friends do. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, Daniel dried his hands on a towel and looked at his son. You're right, I should. So call her. It's not that simple. Why not? Daniel couldn't think of a good reason, so he took out his phone and texted Victoria before he could talk himself out of it. Can we meet? I want to talk. Her response was immediate. When and where? They met at the same park where Daniel had taken Jamie. It was evening now, the playground empty, the sky turning purple and orange as the sun set. Victoria was sitting on a bench when he arrived. She stood when she saw him, her hands clasped in front of her like she was nervous. Hey, she said. Hey. They stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Daniel sat down on the bench and Victoria joined him. I've been thinking, he started, about what you said, about us. And I think you were right. About real life not having to be different from the island. About choosing to make our lives line up instead of just accepting that they don't. Victoria's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to lose you. I don't want to go back to just surviving when I know what it feels like to actually connect with someone, to trust someone completely. Daniel, but I need you to understand something. Jamie comes first, always. Whatever happens between us, he's my priority. I wouldn't want it any other way. And I can't do this halfway. If we try this, I need to know you're all in, not the CEO version of you that keeps everything controlled and perfect. The real you. Victoria took his hand. The real me is terrified. The real me has no idea what she's doing, but the real me wants to try anyway. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, saw the vulnerability beneath the polish, the fear beneath the confidence, saw someone who was just as lost and hopeful as he was. Okay, he said, let's try. They didn't kiss, didn't fall into each other's arms like people did in movies. They just sat on that bench, holding hands, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. I put in my resignation, Victoria said quietly. At the company. Daniel turned to her. What? I told the board I'm stepping down. They're looking for a replacement, someone who actually wants to run a corporation. Victoria, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. You were right. I was holding on to something that didn't make me happy just because I thought I was supposed to. But I don't want to live like that anymore. What are you going to do? I applied to a graduate program, education policy. If I get in, I'll start in the fall. Daniel smiled. You're going to be a teacher, eventually. Maybe. If I don't completely mess it up. You won't. You sound very sure. I am. You're the most determined person I know. When you commit to something, you see it through. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm committing to this. To us. Just so you know. Good. Me too. They sat like that as the stars came out. Two people who'd survived the impossible, learning how to build something real from the wreckage. 6 months later, Daniel stood in Victoria's new apartment, smaller than her old penthouse, in a neighborhood filled with families and coffee shops and actual human warmth, and watched her arrange books on a shelf. You sure you don't want help? He asked. I've got it. You focus on dinner. Jamie was in the kitchen with Daniel, supposedly helping, but mostly just stealing pieces of vegetables. He'd taken to Victoria immediately, won over by her willingness to play complicated space mission games and her complete lack of condescension. Dad, Jamie called. Victoria says she's never made a fort before. Can we show her how after dinner? Absolutely. Victoria appeared in the doorway, smiling. I'm being promised architectural expertise from a 7-year-old. This should be interesting. Don't underestimate him. His forts are legendary. They ate dinner together, the three of them, in Victoria's small dining nook. The conversation was easy, punctuated by Jamie's stories about school and Victoria's updates on her classes. It felt normal, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years instead of months. After dinner, they built the fort. It was a disaster of blankets and pillows that collapsed twice before they got it right. But when they finally crawled inside, the three of them squeezed into the small space, Jamie between Daniel and Victoria. It felt perfect. This is nice, Jamie said, his voice drowsy. Like a family. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a look over his head. She reached out and took Daniel's hand, squeezing gently. Yeah, buddy, Daniel said. It is. Later, after Jamie had fallen asleep and Daniel had carried him to the car, Victoria walked them out. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe you could come to our place for a change. Jamie wants to show you his room, his astronaut posters." "I'd love that." Daniel kissed her goodnight, soft and slow, the kind of kiss that promised more time, more moments like this. Then he got in the car and drove home, Jamie sleeping peacefully in the back seat. A year after the yacht sank, Daniel and Victoria attended a different kind of memorial. This one was private, just the two of them, standing on a beach not far from where they'd first washed up on that island. They'd brought flowers, 5 bouquets for 5 people who'd tried to escape with them. They set them in the water one by one, watching the current carry them away. "Do you think about them?" Victoria asked. "The others?" "Every day," Daniel said. "I think about what they taught us, about resilience, about hope, about not giving up even when everything seems impossible. Mira would have liked you. She would have thought you were brave." She was the brave one. They stood in silence, watching the flowers drift further from shore. The water was calm today, gentle, nothing like the storm that had torn everything apart. "I got the teaching position," Victoria said, "starting in the fall, high school economics." Daniel pulled her close. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." "What about you? Any decision on the job front?" Daniel had been offered a position at a nonprofit that coordinated disaster relief logistics. The pay was less than his old job, but the work felt meaningful, like he was using everything he'd learned, both before and after the yacht, to actually help people. "I took it," he said. "Start next month." "We're really doing this, aren't we? Starting over. Not starting over, starting forward." Victoria looked up at him. "I love you. I don't think I've said that yet, but I do." Daniel's chest tightened with emotion. "I love you too." They kissed there on the beach, with the ocean as their witness, 2 survivors who'd found something worth fighting for. Because that's what Daniel had learned, through all of it. Life wasn't about survival alone. It wasn't about just getting through each day, checking boxes, maintaining the status quo. It was about connection, about choosing to show up for the people you loved, about building something real even when it was hard, even when it scared you, even when you didn't have all the answers. The yacht sinking had taken 15 lives, had nearly taken his and Victoria's, had left scars that would probably never fully heal. But it had also given him something: perspective, clarity, the understanding that every moment was a choice, to retreat or to engage, to protect yourself or to risk connection, to survive or to truly live. He chose to live. They both did. And in the end, that made all the difference. 3 years later, Daniel sat in the audience at Jamie's school science fair, Victoria beside him, her hand in his. Jamie was presenting his project, a scale model of the solar system, complete with orbital paths and a presentation on the physics of space travel. "That's my boy," Daniel whispered. "Our boy," Victoria corrected gently. She was right. Over the past 3 years, they'd built something neither of them had quite expected. Victoria had moved in with them a year ago, and the transition had been surprisingly smooth. She and Jamie had developed their own relationship, independent of Daniel, late-night talks about school, weekend trips to museums, a shared love of terrible action movies. Last month, Daniel had proposed. Victoria had said yes before he'd even finished asking. The wedding was planned for next spring, small and simple, just family and close friends. Jamie would be the ring bearer. He'd already started practicing his walk down the aisle. After the science fair, they went out for ice cream. Jamie got chocolate with sprinkles, same as always. Victoria got vanilla. Daniel got strawberry. "You know what's funny?" Victoria said as they sat outside the shop, watching Jamie chase pigeons. "What?" 3 years ago, I would have told you this was impossible, that someone like me couldn't have this. A family, a life that matters outside of work, real happiness. And now? Now I know that the only thing that was impossible was the life I was living before. This? She gestured at Jamie, at Daniel, at the ordinary evening unfolding around them. "This is the easiest thing I've ever done." Daniel understood what she meant. Not that it was simple, raising a kid, blending a family, building a relationship, none of that was simple, but it felt right in a way that nothing else had. It felt like coming home. "I'm glad you were on that yacht," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "That's a weird thing to say." "I know, but I am." Because if you hadn't been, we never would have met, never would have had any of this. We could have met some other way. Maybe, but we didn't. We met because a storm hit and a yacht sank and we ended up stranded together. And yeah, it was terrible, and yeah, people died. But something good came from it too. We came from it. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. You're right, I'm glad too. Jamie ran back to them, breathless and grinning. Can we get a dog? What? Daniel laughed. Where did that come from? Marcus at school has a dog, and I was thinking, we have a house now, kind of, and a yard, and dogs are good for families. Victoria and Daniel exchanged a look. We'll talk about it, Victoria said. That means yes, right? That means we'll talk about it. Jamie pumped his fist in victory and ran off again. We're getting a dog, aren't we? Daniel said. Probably. They sat there as the evening deepened, watching Jamie play, holding hands like they'd done on that first night on the wreckage. But this was different. This was solid ground. This was home. And if Daniel had learned anything from the island, from the ocean, from nearly losing everything, it was that home wasn't a place. It was the people you chose to show up for. The people who chose to show up for you. Victoria, Jamie, this messy, imperfect, beautiful life they were building together. That was worth surviving for. That was worth everything.